This episode of Then and Now is sponsored by Nerds Resin, a wonderful startup for custom-made nerdy resin pieces. Hello and welcome to what is apparently now a staple show for this channel, Then and Now. Then and Now is when I compare the first issue of a property to the latest first issue of that same title. Think of it as old versus new, except it's not really a versus, and so far 2 of the 3 previously were the new winning despite having really good thens, and 1 was a tie. Thanks to a poll on my Twitter, today we will be covering Marvel's most popular team book, despite Disney's best efforts, The X-Men. As always, check out our Patreon or make a one-off donation to our PayPal with the name of the title you want us to do in the note, and it'll get done. Links to all of that in the description. Also, I want to say that I'm no longer going to be using the category system I had previously on this, but rather break it down to easier to digest blocks with the title history, the then issue, and the now issue, and then a compare at the end. If the new format works, let me know in the comments below. Cue the opening. Alright, a history of the X-Men. Where do I actually start? Well, let's start at the beginning. Stan Lee and Jack Kirby created them after the success of characters like Spider-Man, the Hulk, and Iron Man, but more especially, the Fantastic Four. Lee wanted to do another team book, but didn't want to do an origin story for their powers, so he literally said, "They're born with it, deal." It was Kirby who said it in a school, gave them a professor, and basically all the stuff that would become iconic X-book staples. Either way, for the fun fact of the day, the book was originally going to be called The Mutants, except Martin Goodman told Lee to change the name since no one knew what the hell a mutant was. That's actually pretty funny in hindsight, since Marvel would actually have a lawsuit over the name Mutant when Fox released their show Mutant X. And even now, in 2019, you can actually say the word mutant without thinking about the X-Men. So as for a brief history of the title, well, this should be fun. The original X-Men came out in September of 1963 and received a very warm reception, but that was until sales dropped, and despite trying to refresh the book in 1969, they began to reprint older issues from issue 63 to 92, which then led to the giant-sized relaunch of the team with new members, though Cyclops would still lead them, and this rebirth made them the top-selling comic book for Marvel consistently throughout the 80s. Hilariously, this would lead to the X-Men Index, where publishers would rate their comics not by how many issues actually sold, but how many issues sold compared to the X-Men. The fun things you can learn from old Wizard magazines. This also led to a whole slew of X titles and spin-offs like the New Mutants, and miniseries like Magic or Nightcrawler. They were a big deal. Cut to 1991, where Marvel relaunches their X franchise in 2 major banners, the blue and gold teams, under X-Men and Uncanny X-Men respectively. Despite Marvel's waning popularity and poor management of the era, the X-Men would continue to be a top-selling book and keep pouring out spin-offs. Then the Morrison era came in 2001 through 2004, where there were 3 major X-Men books: New X-Men, Uncanny X-Men, and Extreme X-Men later. Then in 2004 there was another revamp of the line, which was called X-Men Reload, and that was spearheaded by Astonishing X-Men, written by Joss Whedon, with Uncanny X-Men and Regular X-Men taking a side seat to that powerhouse book. Yes, it was during this time House of M happened, and then the whole Endangered Species issue, where like 99.9% of all mutants were depowered, thanks to the mentally unstable Scarlet Witch. This led to the 2007 Messiah Complex era, which lasted until Schism in 2011. Then they had the time-displaced original X-Men come back, the Terrigen Cloud that represented Perlmutter's pettiness over not having the X-Men film rights, which then led to the previously talked about on this channel failed Inhumans push. And while I am really abridging all of this, it brings us to the post-Disney buyout of Fox, and them finally treating X-Men with a little respect. I've done a lot of first issues and have a ton of videos up on this specific era, like the first issues now for X-Men Red, which was awesome, a ComicSins for all new Wolverine, which was awesome, an overly long rant about the death of X, which still sucks, and generally a lot of stuff that no longer matters, thanks to the Resurrection relaunch of everything, which generally gets us to the latest number 1 for Uncanny X-Men, which is obviously Uncanny X-Men number 1 in 2018. And hilariously enough, even that is now moot thanks to Jonathan Hickman's House of X storyline, but hey, that's a different show. So for sake of ease, I'll be calling the original Uncanny X-Men the OG, and when I talk about the new Uncanny X-Men, I'll call it the new one. Will it get confusing? Not really. Although to make it more confusing, technically they weren't the Uncanny X-Men until issue 114, but it became a retroactive name change, so even Marvel calls the very first issue of the 60s X-Men book Uncanny X-Men number 1. But then again, I'm trying not to make this an overly long history of the X-Men video, so we all have our crosses to bear. Now then, to the then. To start off, I am reading from a reprint from 2009, since I don't make enough money on any of these videos to be able to afford a first edition first issue of the very first X-Men book. I mean, you can always remedy that by joining my Patreon or donating to me directly, but you know what I mean. So right off the bat, everyone knows this cover, so I really shouldn't have to say how iconic it has become. So let's just hop straight to the meat of the story. Professor Xavier introduces himself with a bang as he beckons the X-Men to him, with the power of his mind. Angel, Cyclops, and Beast come in fast, though I will never understand what the pole dancing BS Iceman is doing here. I actually retract all previous statements I've made about him being outed the way he was, cause it's pretty gay, bruh. Please don't write in, that was only a joke. But then Psyche and Angel decide to pamper Xavier, which is actually kind of just a lot weirder. This probably would actually be a really terrible introduction to the characters if we at least didn't get some light ribbing between Iceman and Beast. It is a really good way to quickly show that Bobby is a jovial prankster and Beast may be more rough around the edges. Although it does really remind me of the Johnny Storm Ben Grimm relationship from Fantastic Four, so take that as you will. But now it's training time. This is a proto-danger room as Beast showcases his agility, Angel does his incredible flying and makes me wonder how big this room is supposed to be, and then it is Iceman's turn. But Bobby doesn't want the settings on low and hates being treated like a kid, so obviously he acts like a kid by dressing himself up like a snowman. Not sure where he got the carrot, coal, or top hat from, but hey, naturally that's the best time for Beast to chuck a bowling ball at his head. But Bobby does showcase some talent by creating a quick ice slide, but don't worry, Beast catches the ball, trust me. Now, here's a scene that has always resonated with me, and has actually gotten me into some arguments on the internet. The first training we ever see Cyclops do isn't blasting floating plates or maybe precision blasting the bowling ball as it whizzes through the air after Bobby had reversed it onto Beast. No, it's Xavier mentally telling him to blast Beast and Iceman. Were this my typical review style, I'd go deep into what it means for Cyclops' character and psyche, or that it could easily point to Xavier's conditioning on making Cyclops his bloody fist, so Xavier himself could stay the above-it-all peaceful leader who just wants the world to unite. But let's continue. His blast literally plants Beast cartoonishly into a wall, and Iceman would have gotten the same treatment if he didn't turn himself into an ice cube. However, Cyclops opens his visor even more, making it strong enough to break the cube. Xavier then sicks Angel and Beast over to try and subdue Cyclops. Xavier all the while enjoying this because he's a sicko who likes pitting teammates against each other. I mean, because it lets the boys let off some steam with each other. Yeah, go with that one. Eventually, he does tell them to stop playing grab-ass because a new student is on their way, and she's pulling up to the main gate now. The boys go and ogle her from the window like a bunch of, well, horny teen boys. I'm sure this read better in the 60s, but Xavier really should be the adult here. Although we do find out in later issues that he also sprouts a boner at the thought of Jean. Hell, even in this issue, you have him sitting there all, excellent. Also, I love how Bobby is the only one to go, hey guys, come on, it's only a girl. I know it's probably in here because he's supposed to be the young one who doesn't care about girls, but all I'm thinking about is, what are you, gay? We move away from the boys to what really could have only sounded good in the 60s. Jean Grey meets with the professor, talking about how strange the summon was to come to his large mansion alone, with only her parents knowing that she was coming. She doesn't even know what kind of school it is. God, the 60s were a simpler time, weren't they? Well, Xavier gives his, oh, you're a mutant, and this is a school for mutants. We then get the official introduction of the X-Men, with codenames and real names all said. It's actually a pretty good way since we've already seen what their powers can do. Except for Jean, of course, who uses her to move a chair. Yeah, fun fact, many people don't remember or don't know that she originally wasn't really a telepath, just a telekinetic. That was retconned later and everything like that. But apparently Cyclops and the rest are hammered dumb, so she has to actually showcase it more blatantly for them to get it. Then she gets to demonstrate how good it is, because Beast kisses her cheek and paws at her, so she throws him in the air. I'm sure this is in here to make the whole situation feel less rapey because she can handle herself, but sweet Christmas, you could have toned down the fact that the girl who didn't know why she was being summoned to a giant mansion in the middle of nowhere, who Professor X was less than a page ago, is so hot to send the entire class of boys into heat. I'm just saying, this first impression, she should be sprinting all the way back to the cab. On to less worrisome topics, though. Magneto is ready to enact his first evil plan for the racial superiority of mutants. Homo superior. No, I'm not going to make an Iceman joke. That'd be insensitive at this point. He does this by using his magnetic powers to dick with rockets. Then he turns the army's machine guns and tanks to the skies so he can write his ultimatum in the air. And may I just say that it's little touches like Magneto actually signing his name to this message that really just classes Magneto up more than any other villain, except maybe Doctor Doom. So, having done that, Mags just pimp walks into the base, showing his powers by being able to hurl people away from him, with magnets, of course. I may eventually get around to doing a video all about how Magneto's magnetism has been used in the weirdest ways, like when he makes an invisible fence around the base's general and men. However, now he does have control over Cape Citadel. Back in Westchester, Jean gets into her new uniform, and everyone is watching her like it's a screwball's comedy. That little bit of sexual harassment, though, is interrupted by the professor commanding them all to meet up, because there's a situation. That's right, it's their baptism by fire moment when they all have to go and stop Magneto. The two neat things here is that Bobby shows off what we already seen, that all he needs to do is get into his uniform, is ice up, or snow up as it looks, and then throw on some boots. But more importantly, this is the first appearance of Warren's wing sling, which makes him pass for a normie in public. Then we have their transport plane. No, it isn't the Blackbird yet. It's literally just a plane that Professor X guides via thought power from the ground. Oh, don't look at me like that. It's comics. I don't have to explain anything. At Cape Citadel, the military are trying to blast the magnetic field with a howitzer, but to no avail, until the X-Men show up. They get the okay to go in, and kinda act like jackasses to get to the force field. While shoulder checking it doesn't help, Cyclops' concussive blast at full power does break the force field, even causing some physical strain to Magneto. Granted, Psyche is also knocked out, so it's a bit of a wash. Mags is mad now, so he launches some Hunter missiles at the teens. Surprisingly, they do handle the 5 missiles pretty well, but then they reach the boss level as Magneto comes out to get his hands metaphorically dirty. However, we only have 2 pages left in the comic, so the fight goes pretty quickly, with the X-Men countering him fairly well, so he runs off. The X-Men are called Uncanny by the generals, they shake hands, and return to the mansion for another day. As someone who's been reviewing first issues for the past 7 years, I absolutely think that this is a quintessential way to set up the first issue as a one and done. It firmly establishes the characters' traits, though Slim Summers and Warren are kind of given a bit of a letdown because they're generally just reactive characters, but they're also a bit more nuanced than the boisterous Bobby, or the kind of gruff, for a teen anyways, Hank McCoy. In hindsight, it's also a bit shaky how they characterize Xavier, but I think that's because he was supposed to be learning and getting his own, for lack of a better term, footing in making his dream a reality. So it's a solid first issue that can easily be expanded upon in the future, and as we know, it does. A lot. To a point where even this wasn't the actual original team in canon, with like 3 or 4 titles having already come out, trying to retcon earlier teams in the OG5 here. But that's a different show. Today, we are very lucky to have our very first sponsor for the show, Nerds Resin, a small little startup for custom-made nerdy resin pieces, as I said at the top of the video. I personally got my own Pikachu paperweight that does glow in the dark. You'll never truly understand how useful that can be in a poorly lit office until you have one. Check them out on Facebook and Instagram at Nerds Resin, links in the description below. Our new sponsorship program is open to any Kickstarter creator, artist, YouTuber, or even if you're just a Twitter-happy individual. Email me at thecomicarchivist@gmail.com for more information. This is where this, then, and now gets a bit tricky. It's easy to compare 2 separate continuities like with DC, or different companies like with the Power Rangers, but this is technically a single timeline, despite the dozens of retcons, soft reboots, omissions, and technically everything since the original 5 came to the present from the past, since that's how Marvel time travel actually goddamn works. The point of all that is that this may be a #1 issue, and restarting the next stage in mutant evolution as a property, it's kind of hard to do a then and now comparison without going through the entire history. Just as a good example, here's the cast list for this book. 20 characters. 4 of them are the originals, but god, they are not the same characters. I mean, Jean's come back from the dead like 3 times. Also, for sake of my sanity and the length of this video, I'm not covering the What Tomorrow Brings stories that make up most of this issue. They're great preludes to the official disassembled story, but it is a 60-page book, so I need to pick my shots. We open with the now standard previously on, though it acts as just a way to say this is where everyone is right now in the barest way possible. Kitty is the headmistress at the 3rd iteration of the Xavier School, which finally has mutant in the name. And Jean Grey is back from the dead, leading the main X team. Good for them. The story officially starts with a flash forward, because 90% of comics nowadays do, where Jamie Madrox is telling Jean that they need to find Kitty Pryde. Right before Wolverine, oh wait, she's X-23 again. Right before X-23 stabs him through the head with no repercussions. I assume it's because he's one of the multiple men's clones, but still, that's pretty cold. Then we pull back to see that every X-Men is fighting an army of Madroxes. Madroxy? Madri? Whatever. Either way, this was all just a premonition, I guess, because Jean gets those now, apparently, while everyone was at the breakfast table. Yep, riveting. Hop over to Kitty Pryde and the latest X-Men in training team on their way to take out a mutant who's missing out on the easy money of mocapping Goro from Mortal Kombat. I think this part is mainly here to remind the audience, and maybe Mouseful in general, that the X-Men are a team of good guys meant to be taking out the threatening evil mutant. Sort of like if the NAACP were a self-policing task force. Anyways, Kitty then gets phased into the void, or wherever she gets, causing the Blackbird to crash. Meanwhile, over in Africa, Storm and Beast are trying to figure out why a lake randomly sprouted in the middle of the Kalahari, and why Storm can't do anything to adjust the rain clouds. Then we hop back to the X-Rugrats climbing out of the wreck of the plane crash with barely any damage whatsoever. They are then attacked by... Hold on, I have to roll to see which evil mutant group this is. The Mutant Liberation Front. Now, with characters you at home have probably never heard of. And they fight, and they fight, and they fight. Sometime during that fight, though, a Madrox clone comes up to ask where Kitty Pryde is, but she had already vanished. Then the X-Men Red Team shows up, and I'm fairly certain that X-23 kills everybody. Yes, there is a panel showing that they are moaning, but those have to be some death rattles, because you don't have these sound effects without someone dying. But hey, this is an X-Men book, so naturally we have to cut to a standard senator talking about mutants as though they were plastic straws. But this time, it's because they have a mutant cure. And frankly, I always hate when writers come with such an absolutism when it comes to a cure for mutations. As long as it's not mandatory and a choice, I'm pro-choice on this one. But that's a rant for a different show. So the evil Senator Whitebread turns the mic over to Headmistress Kitty. But Jean Grey is going to go take the podium since Kitty is currently missing. However, crazy old Madrox gets there first to rant. This of course leads to what Jean saw in the beginning, but Madrox keeps saying that it's about saving and helping, and I'm sure a dozen clones bum-rushing a US senator will totally help mutant relations. Jean does actually help the senator, but something teleports Senator Whitebread away. When that happens, of course, all the Madri vanish too. Then we get the obvious mainstream journalism wank of shoving cameras and mics into Jean's face, asking why the X-Men attacked the senator the way they did. Elsewhere, Kitty Pryde is tied to a chair next to Senator Whitebread, while next to them, on the wall, is Apocalypse. Dun dun dun! Right, as a first issue, this has the hardest sell in probably all of comics. X-Men over the last several years has been bad. I don't mean that it hasn't been enjoyable in a Michael Bay way, but yeah, there is a reason why the Perlmutter Pettiness era was not well received by most readers. Outside of new readers going, well, it's fun, isn't it? This is to bring new and old readers back to the burned out ruins of a franchise now that Disney Senpai owns the rights. It reintroduces what the X-Men stand for, gives a basic breakdown of where the main teams are at, and just generally is ultimately a setup for the future, which, this having come out last year, I can say the future is pretty bright. This is, in theory at least, a straight line from the very first X-Men comic to this latest one, but there have been so many twists and turns both in universe and in the comics industry that it's become just a fundamental shift that while both do have similar goals and both do very much succeed in them, they are so very different. Originally, the comparison I assumed was going to be discussing how comics in the 60s had compressed storytelling, with a novella's worth of dialogue, narration, and just overall plot squeezed into one issue, while the more modern tends to take a single bit of a story and makes an issue out of it, stretching it so there's more time for actions and interactions. Neither way is wrong, it seems to go the opposite way here. The original had a very simple premise, set everything up to be explored later. While there's still tropes of the time there, like the over-reliance on narration to convey characterization, and a few of the Stan Lee tropes in there like boys being horny is sin, there's a straightforward, simple plot where they train, get a new member, and then have to deal with Magneto for the first time. However, in the new one, there's half a dozen potential plot hooks, like the mutant cure, the Blackbird crashing, the Mutant Liberation Front attacking, the army of multiple men, the media fallout of all of those cameras on Jean after the senator goes missing, and of course the actual next issue hook of Kitty, Senator Whitebread, and Apocalypse captured in a white room by some unknown force. So what's the final conclusion that I can draw? Without going into how the characters evolved and changed, which will eventually be covered in an X-Men reader's history, the new one carries less of the teen drama dynamic that made Marvel Age books such a popular read, but it does carry the spirit of its forebears in a satisfying way that continues even now with Hickman's House of X exploration of the team that will lead to the relaunch of the property and the whole Dawn of X thing, which does include an X-Men #1. Now, because I've been fanboying over the new X-Men coming out, next time for Then and Now will be another X special. This time comparing the newest Adjectiveless X-Men when that comes out, and technically the second, but it will be the X-Men from 1991 by Jim Lee. Oh yeah. And that is all for this video. I'd say sadly, but this has been a hell of a long video. If you like the new format or think I should go back to the more bite-sized versus format, let me know in the comments below. While you're down there, let me know if you agree or disagree, or just what you thought about these comics. As always, if you like this video, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and share and all that jazz, especially since YouTube really hates anyone who's not paying them. We also have a Patreon, and even direct donation stuff, info in the description below. More than anything else though, I'm the Comic Archivist, and stay golden, Inklings.